She was the most beautiful woman in 3 counties, with hair like spun copper and eyes the color of wild honey. But in the dusty, unforgiving town of Copper Ridge, Arizona, her beauty was a curse, because Liz Martinez carried a secret so shameful, so devastating in the year 1887, that it had turned her from the town's most beloved daughter into its most pitied outcast. The whispers followed her like a shadow, the townsfolk treated her like she was poison, and the man who once promised her the world was about to make her an offer that would curdle her blood. But what none of them knew was that her secret pain was about to lead her to a forbidden love, uncover a conspiracy that could burn the whole territory to the ground, and force her to make a choice that would either save everyone she loved or get them all killed. The Arizona sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the cracked adobe buildings of Copper Ridge. It was a town built on grit and whispers, a place where a woman's worth was measured in the number of sons she could provide. And by that measure, Liz Martinez was worthless. She stood inside the sweltering heat of the general store, the scent of canvas and dried beans filling the air, and pretended not to see the pity in people's eyes. At 26, she should have been a wife, a mother. Instead, she was just Liz, the beautiful, broken woman who worked behind the counter. The bell above the door chimed, a sound she'd come to dread. In walked Mrs. Abernathy, a woman who wore mourning black like armor and wielded gossip like a weapon. She was the town's unofficial queen, its moral judge, and she had appointed herself Liz's personal tormentor. Her eyes, small and sharp like a crow's, landed on Liz with a familiar, cruel satisfaction. "Morning, Liz," she said, her voice loud enough for the 2 other customers to hear. "Still here, I see. Not busy tending to a home of your own." Liz's fingers clenched around a bolt of blue calico. The fabric was soft, meant for a baby's blanket. The irony was a knife in her gut. "Good morning, Mrs. Abernathy. Can I help you?" She forced the words out, kept her voice steady. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of her tears. Not again. "Oh, just some thread," the widow chirped, her lips pulling into a thin, smug smile. "For my quilting circle. We're making blankets for the new Henderson baby. Martha's daughter, you know. Her 4th. She let the word hang in the air. 4th. Such a blessing. New life. Of course, she paused, leaning in conspiratorially. Not everyone is so fortunate. The air went thin. Liz could feel the other customers staring, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. This was her life now, a public spectacle of failure. The measuring stick she was holding slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered onto the wooden floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent store. She bent to pick it up, hiding her flushed face, biting the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. When she stood up, her eyes were dry, her expression a perfect blank mask. "Will that be all, Mrs. Abernathy?" But the old woman wasn't finished. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a faux sympathetic whisper that was somehow more vicious than her shout. "You know, my nephew Harold still speaks of you. He says he'd be willing to overlook your condition. At your age, dear, you really can't afford to be choosy. A barren woman needs a charitable man." The words weren't just insults. They were a verdict, a life sentence. Harold Abernathy was a drunk with a weak chin and cruel eyes, and the thought of being his act of charity made her want to vomit. After Mrs. Abernathy finally left, her smugness trailing behind her like cheap perfume, Liz sank onto a stool, the world closing in. For 3 years it had been like this. Ever since Dr. Morrison had stood in her small bedroom, his face grim after her 3rd and final miscarriage, the one that had nearly taken her life along with the baby's. "The damage is too extensive, Liz," he'd said, his voice gentle but his words like stones. "I'm sorry. You'll never carry a child to term." Those words had echoed. They had broken 3 engagements. They had turned friends into strangers who crossed the street to avoid her. They had branded her barren, broken, useless. The bell chimed again. Liz braced herself, but when she looked up, her breath caught. It was Tom Bradley, the town blacksmith, big, handsome, with shoulders as broad as an oak tree, and eyes as blue as the desert sky. He had been her first love, the first man she'd promised forever to, before the doctor's words had turned that promise to dust. He'd broken their engagement quietly, shamefaced, and she hadn't spoken to him since. "Afternoon, Liz," he said, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her the way he used to, with a heat that made her skin prickle. A wild, foolish hope flared in her chest. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he'd realized he loved her more than the idea of a son. He leaned against the counter, so close she could smell the coal dust and sweat on his skin. "I've been thinking, Liz, about us, about what we used to have." His voice was soft, persuasive. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. He was going to ask her to take him back. "Tom, what are you saying?" she whispered, barely daring to breathe. He cleared his throat, a flicker of something she couldn't read in his eyes. "I'm saying, a man gets lonely, and you're still the prettiest woman in this town, child or no child." He reached out, his calloused hand covering hers on the counter. "We could come to an understanding, companionship, without the complications. No need for a wedding or expectations. Just you and me, keeping each other company in the dark." The hope in her chest didn't just die. It was murdered. He wasn't offering her marriage. He wasn't offering her love. He was offering to make her his whore, his secret, shameful comfort, hidden away from the town because she was damaged goods, not fit to be a wife. The pretty, barren girl you could use without consequence. The world tilted, the bolts of fabric blurring into a meaningless swirl of color. All the pain, all the humiliation of the past 3 years coalesced into a single point of white-hot rage. Her voice was a low, dangerous whisper. "Get out!" Tom blinked, taken aback. "Now, Liz, be reasonable. This is the best offer you're gonna get." "Get out!" The scream ripped from her throat, raw and full of a pain so deep it shocked them both. Tom stumbled back, his face flushing a furious red. He looked at her not with desire anymore, but with a new ugly contempt. "You're making a mistake," he snarled. "You'll die an old, lonely maid, Liz Martinez. Don't come crying to me when you do." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass pane rattled in its frame. Liz locked the door, flipping the sign to closed, even though the sun was still high. She couldn't face another person. She couldn't take another sympathetic glance or another whispered insult. Walking home, the laughter of children playing in the schoolyard felt like stones being thrown at her. Each happy shout was a reminder of the empty cradle in her heart, the empty future that stretched out before her. That evening, she sat on her porch, watching the sky bleed into shades of orange and purple over the jagged mountains. The world was so vast, so beautiful, and she was so utterly alone in it. A movement on the horizon caught her eye. A lone rider silhouetted against the setting sun. He rode with an easy grace that said he was part of this land, not just a visitor. As he drew closer, she saw he wasn't from Copper Ridge. His hair was long and black, his skin the color of the rich earth, his features sharp and proud. He was Apache. A jolt of fear, ingrained since childhood, shot through her. The treaty was fragile. Encounters were dangerous. But as he neared her small house, he slowed his horse. He wasn't looking at the town. He was looking directly at her. His eyes, even from a distance, were intense. He was magnificent, powerfully built, with a stillness about him that was captivating. He stopped his horse at her fence line, and for a long moment, they just stared at each other. And in that look, something shifted inside her. He wasn't seeing a spinster. He wasn't seeing a broken, barren woman. His gaze held no pity, no judgment. It held something else, a quiet acknowledgement, a deep, profound respect. He saw her. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Without a word, he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of respect, then urged his horse on, disappearing into the twilight. Liz stayed on her porch long after he was gone, her hand pressed to her chest, where her heart was beating with a strength she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know who he was, or what that silent moment had meant, but as the first star appeared in the darkening sky, She felt something she thought had been buried forever. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was close. The next dawn, Liz woke with a strange sense of purpose. The memory of the Apache rider's gaze had stayed with her through a restless night. It had been a fleeting moment, a silent exchange with a complete stranger, yet it had unsettled the dust of her despair. She dressed quickly, pulling on a simple cotton dress, and slipped out of her house before the town was fully awake. She needed space. She needed to breathe air that wasn't thick with judgment. Her feet, acting on their own accord, carried her toward the creek a mile outside of town. It was her sanctuary, a place where the gurgling water and the rustling cottonwood leaves could almost drown out the whispers in her head. The air was cool, the light soft and golden as it spilled over the mountains. The town was quiet behind her, a sleeping beast. As she neared the familiar bend in the creek, she heard voices, male voices, speaking a language that was not English. Her blood ran cold. Apaches. Every warning she'd ever heard screamed at her to turn back, to run. But she didn't. She crept forward, hiding behind the thick trunk of an old cottonwood, and peered through the leaves. There were 3 of them, their horses drinking from the clear, shallow water. They moved with a quiet confidence, their lean, muscled bodies at ease in the wild. And then she saw him, the rider from last night. In the morning light, he was even more striking, taller than she'd realized, with shoulders that seemed to block out the sun. He knelt by the water, scooping it into his cupped hands, and as the water ran down his strong forearms, he looked up, directly at her. It was as if he'd known she was there all along, his eyes, dark and intelligent, locked with hers. There was no surprise in them, no anger at being spied on. A slow, knowing smile touched his lips, a smile that made her stomach do a nervous flip. He said something low and quiet to his companions. They glanced in her direction, their expressions unreadable, then mounted their horses and, with a final look at their leader, rode away, melting back into the desert. He was alone now, and he was watching her. Every instinct screamed danger. This man was the enemy her people feared, the savage they told stories about to frighten children. But her heart, that foolish, traitorous thing, was pounding with a different emotion entirely. It wasn't fear. It was anticipation. She took a breath and stepped out from behind the tree. He didn't move towards her, just watched her with that same unnerving intensity. He let her make the choice. His stillness was a question. When she didn't run, he waded across the creek, the water swirling around his buckskin-clad legs. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for her to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to smell the faint, clean scent of sage that clung to him. "You are the woman from the store," he said. His voice was deep, melodic, with only a slight accent. It wasn't a question. She could only nod, her own voice trapped in her throat. "My name is Ayana," he said, pronouncing it with a soft cadence. "It means eternal blossom." The irony hit her again, sharp and painful. A man named for blossoms, speaking to a woman whose own body was a barren field. But as he spoke, he wasn't looking at her womb. He was looking at her face. "I saw the pain in your eyes," he continued softly, "but I also saw the strength of a mountain that refuses to crumble." No one had ever called her strong. They called her pitiful, unfortunate, tragic. This stranger, this Apache warrior, saw something in her that her own people had overlooked. He saw her survival as a strength, not a failure. Tears pricked her eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they weren't tears of self-pity. "I'm Liz," she managed to say, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Liz," he repeated, tasting the name. "It is a good name." He gestured to the creek. "My grandmother told me this water holds special magic. She said women from our tribe who struggled to conceive would come here. They would drink the water and pray, and the spirits would bless their wombs." The familiar ache clenched in her stomach. So that's what this was about. Even he saw her as just a broken vessel in need of fixing. The hope that had flickered within her began to dim. "Then the spirits must be sleeping," she said, her voice flat. "I've been coming here for a year. Nothing has changed." A shadow of understanding crossed his face. He seemed to realize his mistake. The healing is not always the one we seek, he said, his voice gentle. Sometimes the spirit must be healed before the body can follow. He knelt again by the water, but this time he looked at her. In my culture, we believe that water shared between two people creates a bond of trust. He cupped the clear, cold water in his hands and held it out to her. An offering. Drink, he said softly. Let me share your burden. She stared at his outstretched hands. This was insane. She was a white woman alone in the desert with an Apache warrior, a man she should fear. Drinking from his hands felt intimate, forbidden, a line she should not cross. But looking into his eyes, she saw no threat. She saw only a quiet sincerity and empathy that reached past all the walls she had built around her heart. It was more than Tom Bradley, more than anyone in Copper Ridge had ever offered her. Slowly, hesitantly, she leaned down and drank. The water was cool, but it was the touch of his skin against her lips that sent a jolt of warmth through her entire body. It was a simple, profound gesture of kindness, a sharing. When she straightened, their faces were only inches apart. She could feel the warmth of his breath, see the universe swirling in his dark eyes. A connection, powerful and undeniable, arced between them. And in that moment, she realized with a terrifying certainty that her life had just split in two. The long, gray years before this man, and whatever came after. But the sound of horses and shouting from the direction of town shattered the spell. A search party. Someone had seen her leave and raised the alarm. I have to go, she said, panic seizing her. If they find you here with me. Ayanna nodded, his expression grim. He understood the danger instantly, not for himself, but for her. Will you come back? He asked, his voice urgent. Her mind screamed no. It was too dangerous, too impossible. But her heart had already answered. Tomorrow, she breathed, at dawn. A brilliant smile transformed his face, chasing away the shadows. I will be here. And then he was gone, disappearing into the brush with the silence and speed of a desert spirit. By the time Sheriff Morrison and his posse rode up, Liz was sitting alone by the creek, her skirts damp, her heart pounding a wild, secret rhythm against her ribs. Miss Martinez, the sheriff called, relief in his voice. We were worried sick. I'm fine, Sheriff, she said, her voice miraculously calm. Just thinking. As they escorted her back to the town that felt more like a prison than ever before, she clutched her secret to her chest. It was a dangerous, fragile thing, this connection to Ayanna. But it was also the first thing in 3 long years that had felt truly alive. That night, she didn't dream of empty cradles. She dreamed of dark eyes that saw her strength, and of a man whose name meant eternal blossom, and she counted the hours until dawn. For 3 weeks, Liz lived a double life. By day, she was the quiet, sad woman in the general store, wrapping parcels of sugar and salt, enduring the familiar sting of Mrs. Abernathy's barbs and the averted gazes of her former friends. But in the cool, gray light of dawn, she was reborn. The creek became their cathedral, a sacred space where the world and its cruel rules ceased to exist. In that hidden grove, they were not a white woman and an Apache warrior. They were just Liz and Ayanna. He told her stories of the stars, legends of his people passed down through generations. He taught her the names of the desert plants, which ones could heal and which could harm. He spoke of a world where a person's spirit was their true value, not the color of their skin or the function of their body. In his eyes, she wasn't barren. She was resilient. She wasn't an outcast. She was a survivor. And Liz, in turn, opened her heart to him. She told him about her lost babies, her broken dreams, the crushing weight of her loneliness. With him, the words didn't come out sounding like a complaint or a plea for pity. They were just her story, and he listened as if it were the most important story in the world. He never tried to fix her. He simply saw her, whole and complete, even in her brokenness. And piece by piece, he was putting her back together. Love was a word they never spoke, but it grew between them, quiet and strong like a desert flower pushing its way through cracked earth. It was in the way he'd brush a stray leaf from her hair, the way his hand would find hers as they walked along the creek, the long, silent moments when they would just look at each other, their souls communicating in a language deeper than words. It was a love that was as impossible as it was inevitable. On the first day of the fourth week, a crisp autumn morning, Ayana was waiting for her with a special promise. Today, he'd said the day before, I will show you the cave of our ancestors, where the spirits of the ancient ones left their stories on the walls. The thought of him sharing something so sacred, so deeply a part of him, made her heart ache with a joy so sharp it was almost painful. But when she arrived at the creek, the easy smile she loved was gone. His face was a mask of tension, his dark eyes clouded with worry. A cold dread washed over her. Ayana? What is it? What's wrong? He took her hands, his grip tight. My people have found out about us, Liz. A hunter saw us 2 days ago. The tribal council has met. They are afraid. He paused, his gaze searching hers. They say I am putting the tribe in danger, that a white woman can only bring trouble. They have forbidden me from seeing you again. The words were like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Of course, how could she have been so naive, so selfish? She had been living in a dream, forgetting that their love had consequences, that it could put his entire community at risk. They're right, she whispered, her voice breaking. I've brought this danger to you. No! His voice was fierce. He pulled her closer, his hands framing her face. Do not blame yourself for their fear. What we have found, it is not a danger, it is a gift. His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped and traced the line of her cheek. And it is a gift I will not give up. His eyes burned with an intensity that stole her breath. Because I love you, Liz. I think I have loved you since the first moment I saw you, standing so proud against the sorrow of your world. The forbidden word was finally spoken. Love. It hung in the air between them, shimmering and powerful. All the carefully constructed walls around her heart crumbled to dust. I love you too, she sobbed, the confession a torrent of relief and terror. God help me, Ayana. I love you. He closed the distance between them, and his lips met hers. The kiss was not gentle or tentative. It was desperate, hungry, a culmination of every stolen glance, every shared secret, every unspoken feeling. It was the taste of hope and the scent of danger, the promise of forever in a world that would never allow it. In that moment, there was no Copper Ridge, no Apache tribe, no past, no future. There was only them, but their world came crashing back in the thunder of hoofbeats, dozens of them, coming fast. They broke apart, their hearts pounding in unison, but it was too late. Bursting through the trees was a posse of a dozen men from town, rifles held at the ready. At their lead were Sheriff Morrison and, to Liz's horror, Judge Nathaniel Hartwell, a man whose rigid beliefs and cold heart were legendary. His face was a thundercloud of righteous fury, and right beside him, his expression a sickening mix of triumph and jealousy, was Tom Bradley. Step away from the savage, Miss Martinez, the judge bellowed, his voice echoing through their sacred grove. He has you under some kind of spell. I'm in no danger, Liz shouted back, her voice shaking but defiant. She moved to stand beside Ayana, a silent declaration of her choice. The hell you're not, Tom Bradley sneered, his eyes filled with venom. He had done this. He had seen her leaving town at dawn, had followed her, had brought this army down upon them. No decent woman would meet a filthy Apache in secret. He's corrupted you. Ayana stepped slightly in front of her, a protective shield. His hands were raised, palms open, a gesture of peace. There is no trouble here, he said, his voice calm and steady, despite the dozen rifles aimed at his heart. This is a peaceful meeting. Judge Hartwell let out a cold, humorless laugh. Peaceful? Son, your people have a treaty that strictly forbids this kind of fraternization. You are in violation of federal law, you are trespassing, and you are corrupting one of our women. The judge's eyes flickered to Liz, and she saw something in them that was far more terrifying than simple prejudice. It was a cold, calculating possessiveness, as if she were a town asset he was reclaiming. Liz's mind reeled. She had been so lost in her own happiness, she'd forgotten the rules, forgotten the lines that could not be crossed. And now Ayanna was going to pay the price. "This is my fault," she said, stepping out from behind him. "I sought him out. I came here on my own. If a law was broken, then I am the one you should arrest." "Liz, no," Ayanna warned, his voice low. But she wouldn't be silenced. "Where was all this concern for my welfare when this town left me to rot?" she demanded, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "Where was this outrage when Tom Bradley offered to make me his back-alley whore? This man," she gestured to Ayanna, "has shown me more decency and respect than anyone in Copper Ridge. If that's a crime, then you're all guilty." A shocked silence fell over the posse. Tom Bradley's face went white, then purple with rage at being exposed. He spurred his horse forward. "You ungrateful bitch! I offered you comfort and you threw it away for this animal." The words snapped something in Ayanna. He moved like lightning. In 2 strides, he was beside Tom's horse, and with a strength that seemed inhuman, he ripped the blacksmith from his saddle and threw him to the ground. Before Tom could even gasp, Ayanna had him pinned, a powerful forearm pressed against his throat, choking off his air. "You will not speak her name again," Ayanna hissed, his voice a deadly whisper that carried in the silent air. "And you will never call me animal." The click-clack of a dozen rifle hammers being pulled back was the only sound. "Let him go, Apache," Judge Hartwell commanded, his voice dangerously calm, "or we will water these trees with your blood." Ayanna's eyes found Liz's. In them she saw it all, his fierce love for her, his regret, and a terrible final acceptance. He was ready to die, right here, for her honor. "Please," she choked out, the word a shattered prayer. "Don't." For a heart-stopping second, nobody moved. The world held its breath. Then slowly, Ayanna released his grip on Tom. He stood up and raised his hands in surrender. Tom scrambled away, coughing and gasping, his face a mask of terror and hate. "I will go with you," Ayanna said to the judge. "But you must give me your word. Liz Martinez will not be harmed or blamed for any of this." Judge Hartwell looked from Ayanna to Liz, his eyes cold and assessing. A strange look passed over his face, a flicker of something that looked almost like grudging respect for Ayanna's bravery. "You have my word. She will be seen as your victim, so long as she ends this foolishness now." "No!" Liz cried out, the word tearing from her soul. "I won't." "Then you sentence him to death," Tom snarled, finding his courage now that Ayanna was surrounded. "The tribal council wants him. They'll make an example of him for breaking the treaty and bringing the white man's wrath down on them. You'll be the reason he dies, Liz." The choice was a poisoned blade. Either way, she turned. Give him up and lose him forever, or cling to their love and watch him be killed for it. Her world collapsed into the space between her and Ayanna. His eyes were pleading with her, trying to tell her something. "Trust me." He turned to the judge. "Let me say goodbye," he said. Hartwell gave a curt nod. Ayanna walked to her, the armed men parting to let him pass. He stopped so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The guards were watching, their rifles ready. He leaned in, as if for a final whispered farewell. His breath was warm against her ear. "This is not the end," he murmured, his voice so low only she could hear it. "They are taking me back to the reservation, but I will not stay there. Meet me, tonight after the moon is high, at the old mission ruins south of town. Trust me, Liz. Be there." Then he stepped back and spoke in a louder voice for all to hear. "I am sorry for the trouble I have caused you, Miss Martinez. I hope you find happiness." It was a perfect performance. He turned his back on her, walked to the sheriff, and allowed his hands to be bound with a leather thong. As they hauled him onto a horse, he looked at her one last time over his shoulder. His eyes were not the eyes of a defeated man. They were the eyes of a warrior with a plan. The posse rode off, leaving Liz alone in the desecrated silence of their sanctuary. The moment they were gone, her knees buckled and she collapsed, sobs racking her body. It was over. It was all over. But through the storm of her grief, his words echoed, a single defiant flame in the darkness. "Trust me. Be there." He wasn't just asking her to meet him. He was asking her to risk everything. Her safety, her life, what little reputation she had left. To leave the only home she'd ever known and step into a future so uncertain it was terrifying. What would you do? Would you stay in the miserable safety of your cage? Or would you fly into the storm for the one person who ever made you feel free? Liz Martinez got to her feet. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken her. They didn't know the woman they just created. Tonight, under the high moon, she would go to the ruins. She didn't know what Ayana's plan was, or if they even had a chance. But she knew one thing for certain. Her story wasn't over. It had just begun. If you're on the edge of your seat, wondering if Liz will make it to the ruins, or if this is all some terrible trap, then you're not alone. My heart is pounding right along with yours. This story is about more than just forbidden love. It's about courage, prejudice, and the fight for a life you choose, not one that's chosen for you. We put everything we have into finding and telling these powerful stories, and if you're as invested as I am, do us a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. It tells us you want more tales like this, and it helps our community grow. Don't miss what happens next because the biggest twists are yet to come. Trust me, you're going to want to be here for the ending. Now let's get back to the story. The ride back to Copper Ridge was a silent parade of shame. Liz sat her horse, surrounded by the men who had just torn her world apart, and endured their smug, triumphant looks. They thought they had rescued a damsel in distress, saved a fallen woman from her own wicked impulses. They had no idea they were escorting a rebel back to the heart of their camp. Every detail of her surroundings burned into her memory. The way Judge Hartwell's eyes scanned the landscape not with appreciation, but with an unnerving sense of ownership. The way Tom Bradley kept shooting her venomous glances, a man scorned and hungry for revenge. She was no longer just an outcast. She was an enemy. Back in her small adobe house, the silence was suffocating. The town had already heard. She could feel their eyes on her windows, hear the whispers starting to snake through the dusty streets. Mrs. Abernathy would be having a field day. But Liz felt strangely calm. The fear and grief had burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated purpose. Be there. Ayana's words were a compass point in the chaos. As dust settled, she began to prepare. She packed a small canvas bag, a canteen of water, a loaf of stale bread, her small savings of a few silver dollars, and a sharp skinning knife her father had left her. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Every move was deliberate, methodical. She was shedding her old life like a snake sheds its skin. The Liz who endured, the Liz who wept in secret, was gone. A new Liz, a woman who acted, was taking her place. But a nagging question chewed at the edge of her mind. How had the posse known exactly where to find them? Tom Bradley must have followed her. But it felt too clean, too organized. Judge Hartwell had been there, fully prepared, as if he were expecting a confrontation. It wasn't just a spurned lover's jealousy. It felt like something bigger, and the judge's cold dismissal of her, as if her feelings were an irrelevant nuisance, stuck with her. It wasn't the fury of a man defending a woman's honor. It was the annoyance of a man whose plans had been inconveniently interrupted. What plans? Just as the moon began to rise, a soft knock came at her door. Her heart leaped into her throat. It couldn't be the sheriff again. She crept to the door, knife in hand. "Who is it?" she whispered. "It's me, Elena." Elena was Dr. Morrison's young wife, a quiet, kind woman who had always treated Liz with gentle sympathy. Liz cautiously opened the door. Elena slipped inside, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "I have to be quick," she whispered, pressing a small, heavy pouch into Liz's hand. "It's from my husband. He feels responsible for your pain. He told me to give you this." Liz opened the pouch. It was full of gold coins, more money than she'd ever seen. "I can't take this." "You must," Elena insisted. "But that's not why I'm here. Liz, you're in more danger than you know. It's not just about you and that Apache warrior." She took a shaky breath. "Last week, Judge Hartwell and a few other men, including Tom Bradley, were at our house late at night. They thought I was asleep. I heard them talking. They found something in the hills on the edge of the reservation. A silver vein. A big one." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The land. It was always about the land. The treaty protects that land, Elena continued, her voice trembling. They can't touch it as long as the Apache are there. But Judge Hartwell said, he said he had a plan to solve the Indian problem. He said all it would take is one spark to break the treaty, an Apache attack, or a warrior caught breaking the law, something to convince the army that the tribe is hostile and needs to be removed. Liz felt sick. Their love hadn't been the cause of the conflict. It had been the excuse. Judge Hartwell hadn't been trying to save her. He'd been using her, using their love as the spark to light his fire of greed. Tom Bradley hadn't just been a jealous suitor. He was a co-conspirator, eager for a piece of the silver. They had orchestrated the whole thing. They are going to kill him, aren't they? Liz whispered. Ayanna. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I don't know, but I heard the judge tell Tom that once the warrior was handed over to the tribal council, it wouldn't matter what they did. The incident would be enough. He's already sent a rider to the fort with a report about a hostile Apache abducting a white woman. He's manufacturing a war, Liz. The full weight of the conspiracy crashed down on her. Ayanna wasn't just a prisoner. He was a pawn, a sacrifice to be used for a land grab that would displace or destroy his entire people. And she had led him right into the trap. Her private pain had been twisted into a public weapon. Thank you, Elena, Liz said, her voice shaking with a fury so cold it burned. You've risked everything by telling me this. He was kind to you, Elena said simply. In this town, that's a risk worth taking. Be careful, Liz. She slipped out the door and disappeared into the night. Liz stood in the center of her small house, the gold coins heavy in her hand. The choice was no longer just about love. It was about justice. It was about saving a whole community of people from being wiped out by the greed of a few powerful men. Her meeting with Ayanna at the ruins was no longer just a rendezvous. It was a war council. She blew out the lamp, grabbed her bag, and slipped out the back door, melting into the deep shadows of the desert night. The huntress was on the move. The 2-mile journey to the mission ruins was a tense crawl through a landscape of ghosts. The moon was high and bright, casting long, eerie shadows that played tricks on the eyes. Every rustle of a bush, every howl of a distant coyote sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. She moved silently, keeping to the low ground of the arroyos, her senses screamingly alive. She was no longer a shopkeeper. She was something wilder, something forged in the desert's crucible. The ruins appeared like a skeleton against the starry sky, the crumbling adobe walls of an old Spanish mission, long abandoned to the wind and the sun. Her heart pounded as she approached, the knife slick in her sweaty palm. Was he here? Had he escaped? Or was this a trap? She slipped through a collapsed archway into the main courtyard. It was empty. A cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. Had she been a fool to believe him? Was he already dead, his body lying somewhere on the reservation as a warning? Ayanna, she whispered, the sound swallowed by the immense silence. I am here. His voice came from the shadows of the bell tower. He stepped into the moonlight, and relief washed over her so powerfully her knees went weak. He was bruised and his shirt was torn, but he was alive, and he was alone. How did you get away? She rushed to him, her hands checking him for serious injuries. A grim smile touched his lips. The sheriff's deputies are not as clever as they think, and they underestimated who they were dealing with. He explained that he'd been taken to the edge of the reservation to be handed over to the tribal elders. But the men who met the posse weren't the elders. They were Ayanna's cousins, warriors loyal to him, alerted by one of the men who had been with him at the creek that morning. There was a brief, confusing scuffle in the dark, and in the chaos, Ayanna had simply disappeared. They will think my own people have taken me for judgment, he said. It will buy us time, but not much. His expression grew serious as he looked at her. Liz, you should not have come. It is too dangerous. I had to, she said, her voice low and urgent. It's worse than you think. She quickly told him everything Elena had revealed. The silver, Judge Hartwell's conspiracy, the false report sent to the army. As she spoke, Ayanna's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. The look in his eyes was terrifying. It was the look of a man who was about to burn the world down to protect his own. So, he said, his voice deceptively soft, they used our hearts to start a war. They sought to make me the villain in a story they wrote. He looked at the moon, then back at her. They have made a grave mistake. They think they have cornered a lone wolf. They do not realize they have angered the entire pack. What can we do? Liz asked. The army will believe the judge. They'll ride out here, and there will be a massacre. They have a story, Ayanna said, a dangerous glint in his eye. We must give the world a better one, a true one. Judge Hartwell has proof of this silver, yes? Maps? An assayer's report? Liz's mind raced. I don't know, but if he does, it would be in his office, in the courthouse. It's the most secure building in town. Then that is where you must go, he said. She stared at him aghast. Me? Break into the judge's office? It's impossible. It's guarded. Nothing is impossible, he said, taking her hands. You are smarter than they think. You are one of them. You can move through that town in ways I never could. You must find the proof of his plan, Liz. A map, a letter, anything that connects him to the silver and exposes his lie about the treaty land. Without it, my people's word against his is worthless. And what will you be doing? She asked, her heart hammering at the thought of the risk. I am going to visit my elders, he said, his voice grim. Some of them did not trust me. They feared my connection to you. Now I will show them that our connection is the very thing that can save us. I will bring my warriors. We will not ride for war. We will ride for justice. We will meet you back at the creek at sunrise. But you must have the proof, Liz. It is the only way. This was his plan, a desperate, insane gamble that placed the fate of his entire people squarely on her shoulders. She had to go back into the lion's den, alone, while he rallied an army. It was a suicide mission, but as she looked into his eyes, she saw he had absolute faith in her. He still saw the strength of the mountain, even when all she felt was the trembling of a single, terrified leaf. Okay, she breathed, the word tasting of both terror and resolve. I'll do it. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. Be the shadow, Liz, he whispered into her hair. Be the whisper they cannot hear. Be the woman they never saw coming. He gave her one last hard kiss, a promise of reunion in a world of uncertainty. Until sunrise. Then, just as he had before, he turned and melted into the desert night, leaving her alone in the ruins with an impossible task ahead of her. The moon watched her, a cold silver eye in the sky. She had to get back to Copper Ridge, break into the most fortified building in town, steal evidence from the most powerful man in the territory, and escape without being caught. All before the sun came up. The fate of hundreds rested on the courage of one woman they had all written off as broken. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. Returning to Copper Ridge was like entering a ghost town. The moon bathed the empty main street in a stark, black and white light. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Liz moved with a stealth she didn't know she possessed, flitting from alley to alley, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The courthouse stood at the end of the street, a squat, imposing adobe building with thick walls and barred windows. A single lamp burned in the sheriff's office next door. She circled to the back. As Ayanna had predicted, they wouldn't expect a threat from within. They'd be watching the desert, watching for Apaches. The judge's office was on the ground floor, its window facing a narrow, dark alley. The window was barred, just as she'd feared. It was impossible. She felt a wave of despair. She was going to fail. Ayanna's faith in her had been misplaced. Then she remembered something. The judge was a man of routines. Every afternoon, just before closing, the janitor, an old man named Silas, would prop open the back door to air out the dust. He always wedged it with a specific broken brick. If she was lucky, if Silas had been lazy tonight, she crept to the back door. Her breath caught. There, jamming the heavy wooden door just slightly ajar, was the broken brick. It was a miracle, a sliver of hope. She eased the door open just enough to slip inside. The courthouse was dark and silent, smelling of stale paper and floor polish. She knew where the judge's office was. Second door on the right. The door was locked, of course, a thick oak door with a heavy brass lock. She had no way to open it. Her mind raced, searching for a solution. She thought of Ayanna. Be the woman they never saw coming. Who in this town had keys to everything? The sheriff, the judge, and Silas, the janitor. His keys would be on a ring, hanging on a hook just inside the supply closet at the end of the hall. It was a long shot, but it was the only one she had. Moving like a phantom, she crept down the hall to the closet. Her fingers found the cool metal hook. The keys were there, a heavy ring of them. She fumbled with them, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit one into the lock of the judge's office. One key failed, then another. Her panic mounted. Finally, the third key she tried turned with a soft, oily click. She slipped inside the office and gently closed the door. The room was filled with the smell of leather and cigar smoke. Moonlight streamed through the barred window, illuminating a massive oak desk, shelves overflowing with law books, and a large map of the territory tacked to the wall. She had to find the proof. She went straight to the desk, her fingers flying through drawers. Deeds, contracts, court dockets. Nothing. It had to be here. She lit a match, the tiny flare of light seeming monstrously bright in the darkness. She used it to light the judge's oil lamp, turning the wick down low. Her eyes scanned the room. Where would a man like Hartwell hide something so valuable? Not in his desk. Too obvious. Her gaze fell on the large map on the wall. It was a standard territorial survey, but something was off. In the corner near the edge of the reservation was a series of small, faint pencil marks that didn't belong. They outlined a section of land, right over the sacred creek. Her creek. She ran her fingers over the map. The paper felt thick, uneven. It was two maps glued together. The survey map on top was a decoy. With trembling fingers, she found a loose corner and began to peel. Underneath was another map, a hand-drawn geological survey, crisscrossed with lines and notes. And there in the center was a large, crudely drawn star with one word written next to it in the judge's spidery handwriting: Corazon, the heart. And below it, an assayer's note: purity at 80%, richest vein in the territory. This was it, the proof. But a map wasn't enough. She needed more. She needed to tie the judge directly to the plan to start a war. She searched the room again, frantically this time. Her eyes landed on a small locked strongbox tucked away on a bottom shelf behind a row of thick legal books. This had to be it. But the key? Where was the key? She tried the keys from Silas's ring, but none of them fit. She looked around the desk again. The judge was a vain man. He had a silver-framed portrait of himself standing on his desk, looking stern and important. Acting on a hunch, she picked it up. Taped to the back of the frame was a small, ornate silver key. Her hands shook as she retrieved it and fitted into the lock of the strongbox. It turned. Inside was a ledger and a series of letters. Her blood ran cold as she read them. They were copies of correspondence between Judge Hartwell, a senator back east, and an Army captain at Fort Grant. The letters laid out the entire conspiracy in cold, damning detail. They described the silver discovery, the Apache problem that stood in their way, and the plan to provoke an incident that would justify breaking the treaty and clearing the land. The last letter, dated just yesterday, was the most chilling. It was from the judge to the captain. "The savage has taken the bait," it read. "He has been seen consorting with a local woman of loose morals, a known baron. I have arranged for a posse to apprehend him tomorrow at dawn. The confrontation will provide the necessary justification. Expect my report of an abduction and hostile action by nightfall. Be prepared to ride on my command. We will have our war, and then we will have our silver." A woman of loose morals, a known baron. He hadn't just used her. He had quantified her, dismissed her, written her into his vile story as a worthless prop. The rage that filled her was so pure, so absolute, it felt like swallowing fire. She took the letters and the map. She had what she needed. She was about to leave when she saw one more thing in the strongbox. A single stick of dynamite, complete with a fuse and blasting cap, likely for the future mining operation. An idea, wild and dangerous, sparked in her mind. They wanted a spark? She would give them a fire. She worked quickly, her mind clear and cold. She took the dynamite and wedged it into the drawer of the judge's desk, along with the ledger. She left the fuse dangling out, just barely visible. Then she took the judge's letter, the one that called her a baron, and used a pin from her hair to fix it to the wall, right over the map of the Corazon mine. Let that be the last thing they saw. She returned the keys to the closet, slipped out the back door, and melted back into the night. She had the proof. Now she just had to survive until sunrise. But as she reached the edge of town, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking her path. Her heart stopped. It was Tom Bradley, and he was holding a shotgun. "Going somewhere, Liz?" he slurred. He was drunk, but his eyes were sharp with malice. "Saw a light in the judge's office. Figured I'd check it out. I knew you were up to no good. You're just like him, aren't you? A treacherous snake." His face was twisted with a strange mix of jealousy and self-loathing. "You think you're so much better than me?" "Let me pass, Tom," she said, her voice steady, her hand gripping the knife in her bag. "I should have known," he rambled on, his voice cracking. "I should have left you alone. But I saw you with him, and I couldn't stand it." A strange, agonized look crossed his face. "Do you know what it's like to live with what I did? Every day?" "What are you talking about?" Liz asked, confused by his sudden shift. "That night," he choked out, the words tumbling from him in a drunken rush. "Your second miscarriage. The barn dance. We argued. You ran out, and I was angry. I saddled my horse to follow you, but I was drunk. I rode too fast. I didn't see you on the path until it was too late. The horse, it shied. It struck you." The world stopped spinning. The memory, blurred by pain and trauma, came rushing back. The argument, running out into the dark, a sudden, sharp impact, and then a searing pain before she blacked out. The doctor had said she must have tripped and fallen, but it wasn't a fall. It was him, Tom Bradley. He hadn't just broken her heart, he had broken her body. He was the reason she was barren. "You," she whispered, the single word filled with a universe of horror and understanding. His cruel proposition hadn't been an offer of companionship. It had been a twisted, guilt-ridden attempt to possess the woman he had broken, a way to silence the ghost that haunted him. "I never meant to hurt you, Liz, I swear," he sobbed, the shotgun wavering in his hands. "I loved you. But now you're going to ruin everything. The silver? It was my chance to be someone, to get away from this." His eyes hardened again. "The judge said if there was any trouble, I was to handle it. No witnesses." He raised the shotgun. It was aimed directly at her heart. She had survived so much only to be killed in a dusty alley by the ghost of her past. But as she looked into Tom's broken, pathetic face, she felt no fear, only a vast, empty pity. Just as his finger tightened on the trigger, a sound split the night. Not a gunshot. A massive, earth-shaking boom. From the center of town, a pillar of fire and smoke shot into the night sky. The courthouse. Her little spark had found its kindling. The explosion threw Tom off balance, his shot going wide, splintering the wall next to her head. In that split second of confusion, she didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, not with the knife, but with the heavy pouch of gold coins Elena had given her. She swung it with all her might, catching Tom square in the temple. He crumpled to the ground unconscious. Shouts and bells erupted from the town. Windows lit up. People were pouring into the streets, running towards the fire. In the chaos, no one saw the lone woman slip away from the edge of town and run. Not away from the fire, but towards the dawn. She ran with the letters clutched in her hand, the truth that would save them all. Her lungs burning, her legs screaming, fueled by a rage and a hope so powerful, she thought she might fly. She reached the creek just as the first hint of pink touched the eastern sky. And there, emerging from the desert mist like avenging spirits, were Ayanna and 50 Apache warriors on horseback. They were not painted for war. They were riding for justice. Ayanna swung down from his horse as she stumbled towards him, catching her in his arms. "You did it!" he breathed, seeing the papers in her hand. "They're coming," she gasped, pointing back toward the town, where the orange glow of the fire was now joined by the flickering of dozens of torches. A posse, a much larger one this time. "And the army won't be far behind." Ayanna looked at the papers, his jaw tight. Then he looked at his warriors. Then he looked at her, his eyes filled with a fierce, unwavering love. "Let them come," he said, his voice ringing with the authority of a chief. "Today we do not run. Today we show them what true strength looks like." He helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her, and together they turned to face the coming storm. The battle for Copper Ridge, for the truth, and for their future, was about to begin. The two groups met in the open plain between the town and the creek, the rising sun casting long, dramatic shadows behind them. On one side stood 50 Apache warriors, silent and resolute, led by a man fighting for his people's survival. On the other, a panicked mob of nearly every man in Copper Ridge, armed with rifles and shotguns, led by a furious Judge Hartwell and a newly awakened, bruised Tom Bradley. Between them on Ayanna's horse sat Liz Martinez, no longer an outcast but a queen between two armies. "Murderers! Saboteurs!" Judge Hartwell screamed, his face purple with rage, pointing at the column of smoke still rising from his destroyed office. "You see their treachery? They attack our town, our laws. Fire on them." But before any of the townsmen could raise their rifles, Sheriff Morrison rode his horse into the space between the two groups. "Hold your fire," he commanded. "We will have no massacre here today." He turned to Ayanna. "What is the meaning of this?" "We have not come for war, Sheriff," Ayanna said, his voice carrying across the field. "We have come for justice. This man," he pointed a long, accusatory finger at Judge Hartwell, "is a liar and a thief." "Lies!" Hartwell shrieked. "Don't listen to the savage." "His words may be lies," a new voice called out, and Liz's heart soared. It was Dr. Morrison, with his wife Elena beside him, riding out from the town. "But the words on this paper are his own." The doctor held up a scorched piece of paper. The letter. The one Liz had pinned to the wall. The explosion had blown it clear of the building. The sheriff took the letter and read it aloud. As the judge's own words filled the morning air, his plan, his greed, his contemptuous dismissal of Liz, a shocked silence fell over the townsmen. They looked from the letter to the judge, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion, then to dawning horror. They had been lied to. They had been used. "It's a forgery," Hartwell sputtered, his eyes wild with panic. "Is this a forgery too?" Liz's voice rang out, clear and strong. She held up the letters and the map she had taken from his strongbox. "Letters to a senator? To an army captain? A map to the Corazon silver mine on protected land?" She dismounted and walked alone into the center of the field, holding the evidence high for all to see. She faced the men of Copper Ridge, the men who had scorned her, pitied her, and propositioned her. "This man did not care about my honor," she said, her voice trembling with passion. "He used my pain as a weapon. He was willing to sacrifice my life, Ayanna's life, and the lives of an entire people, all for the love of silver. Who is the real savage here?" The final blow came from Tom Bradley. He stumbled forward, his face a mess of bruises and tears. "She's telling the truth," he mumbled. Then his voice grew stronger. "All of it. He promised us all a share. He told me to silence her if she found out." Then he looked at Liz, his eyes filled with a deep, bottomless shame. "And it was me," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I was the one who hurt you, all those years ago. It was my fault, you. It was all my fault." The conspiracy was laid bare. The truth in all its ugly glory was revealed. The townsmen lowered their rifles, their faces masks of disgust and betrayal, all aimed at one man, Judge Nathaniel Hartwell. He was no longer a respected leader. He was just a greedy, pathetic thief. Seeing his power evaporate, he made a last, desperate move. He drew a pistol from his coat and aimed it at Liz. "You've ruined everything," he screamed. But before he could fire, two things happened at once. A rifle shot cracked from the side, and the pistol flew from the judge's hand as Sheriff Morrison put a bullet through his wrist. At the same moment, Ayanna launched himself from his horse, tackling the judge to the ground, his fury absolute. It was all over. As the sun finally crested the mountains, bathing the scene in a warm golden light, the men of Copper Ridge, led by the sheriff, surrounded the disgraced judge and a sobbing Tom Bradley, placing them both under arrest. The arriving army cavalry, who had ridden out expecting to fight a war, instead found themselves taking custody of a corrupt federal judge. In the quiet aftermath, Liz and Ayanna stood by the creek. Their creek. The water bubbled over the rocks, washing away the hatred and the lies. Their love, born in secret and tested by fire, had not only survived, it had triumphed. It had exposed the darkness and brought the light. The people of both their communities, brought to the brink of war by one man's greed, now looked at each other with a new, hesitant understanding. A bridge had been built. Ayanna took her hand. "My name means eternal blossom," he said softly, a smile finally returning to his face. "But you, Liz Martinez, you are the one who bloomed in the desert. You are the strongest flower of all." She looked at the town of Copper Ridge, the place that had been her prison, and then she looked at Ayanna, the man who had set her free. Her future was no longer a barren, empty landscape. It was a wide-open frontier, full of possibilities, and she would face it with him, together. They had walked through fire and come out the other side, not burned, but forged into something new, something stronger. Their love story wasn't just about two people finding each other. It was a testament to the fact that even in the harshest, most unforgiving of places, true strength isn't about the fist you can make, but the hand you're willing to hold. And that sometimes the most broken souls can be the ones who heal the world. What an incredible journey. Liz and Ayanna fought against prejudice, greed, and their own past to find not only each other, but justice for everyone. Their story is a powerful reminder that one person's courage can truly change the world. If their fight for love and truth moved you as much as it moved me, please hit that subscribe button and become part of our story-loving community. We have so many more incredible tales to share, and we'd be honored to have you with us for the next one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.